So I should have said Arios Pagatos, the Rock of Aries, Aries, not Apollo. I was thinking, thinking of Dugan's tripartite logo eye has made me slip into that Freudian lapse, as it were. Um, so, um, and I want to get to Dugan in this. I want to get some kind of contrapuntal, thinking going here on a number of points with the Russian-German thing here. And at the same time, I want to contrast Dugan's. So far as I understand Dugan, I don't know Dugan's work all that well, so I'm just going with what makes impression on me on the surface, more or less. So far as he says that the American logos has to do with practicality and the work of John Dewey, for instance, John Dewey, the great American educator. Um, I I don't accept that. I flatly reject that as artificial. But what is my view of the American logo? I'm somewhat handicapped in saying that for the reason that I'm not exactly sure how Dugan understands the logo eye. So therefore, in some sense, we're not talking about the same thing in the same respect. I see the American logo eye as much more linked to two parts. So this counterpuntal again. Mishima says here on his great work on the Mar Fecunditas, the Sea of Fertility, his quaternity of his greatest novels, on the title, that it quote unquote, that it superimposes the image of cosmic nihilism with that of the fertile sea. So we have on one side this great spontaneous belief in the Americans of their the coming of the progress and happiness through, and you could say through labor and work, as in the concept, the concept of capitalism and communism is that all human value, which means human value, comes from labor or work, not from organization, or the idea as Cicero gave it in antiquity, not from the organization of the community and so on, but from the elbow grease, if you like. I mean, for even an acorn falls from the, well, not an acorn, but let's say an apricot falls from the tree, somebody has to pick it up to eat it. So I think there's a split in the happiness. On the one side, Heidegger is showing us that when he says all docile, all human beings are verrückt, we're crazy, and this is not an artificial addition. The one side that links to science. So in the current Wertfrei, worthless, as it were, but actually that translates to mean value-free science. So the facts on the one side and the values on the other. The Wertfrei, or objective in the vernacular sense, science, the science of facts without the addition of the direction of the sense of what are the possibilities of this thing, of the motive, without the addition of the motive, the little moth floating around every fact, the motive, and lighting on it on occasion. This sense is always in the hidden background. So I think Heidegger, unlike everyone else, understands the techne as the highest essencing in our time, and we don't notice it because we take it for granted in a way. The view taken for granted is that things are kind of improving, whether or not you, and it doesn't. Yes, you have some people like Stephen Pickard that make this into an explicit view, but if you just try to derive from observation of what's happening in the essence of being, then you come to this conclusion. Now, of course, Dugan may want to speak against this deliberately in order to say that, oh no, the this great actor, the American people, quote unquote, is not like that. It's not like the technological essence. But then he comes into contradiction with Heidegger himself, who says this is what's holding sway now. And what happens is that actually the Americans are extremely idealistic, and they believe very powerfully in this view that if they just, to use the British phrases, they just carry on, things are, it's, I give more of a French account of it, which isn't quite right, but the French account bleeds into the American psyche, and the telluric forces, as it were, that Dugan speaks of the Sibyllian, but in a more Jungian terms, the telluric or the earth forces, the Americans seems to have this push towards the same goal through the mechanism of that happiness will come through the accrual of the facts, which is coming through all the inventions that are being pumped out of the hard sciences. It's easiest to say the hard sciences rather than to go into the whole account of the theory of the object and the technique and so on, and why is this not really a science and so on. But it's as though through the labor or the work, everything is building up, as we hear all the time, quote unquote, progress, and this will eventually bring us to happiness. Contrary to and this is somehow the symbolistic view of everyone in America, whether or not they will state this positively or not, because it links to the values of the Constitution. It links to the whole sense of the whole political order, and it links to how everyone lives, especially if you think of the great value that's put on work for its own sake, as it were. But I don't go into the details here, but what I want to say is there's a counterpuntal, what is the counterpuntal music? You have, and I think of, so Freude, Schön, Gottesfunken, joy, beautiful divine spark, that you think of Beethoven's Ode to Joy. This throwback to the Enlightenment, to the unified view of the Enlightenment, which in the figure of Goethe kind of straddles Germany and France, and you see it in Beethoven. This view, so Beethoven isn't counterpuntal, actually. It's a unified view. If you go back to Bach, then you have the counterpuntal music in its high form. If you go back to Palestrina, to the core of Catholicism, where Palestrina came under attack because in one of the by the Catholics on the score of is the plain song effacing the religious power of the music, which will help bring man up to the highest goal, which at that time was not yet the goal of the sciences. As Alfred North Whitehead says in his modern notion of religion, he says, religion is that which man does with his aloneness. And he contrasts it, and this is the inner, so we're going on this inner outward thing again. This is the inner concept of religion, which tends more and more towards the so-called private sublimity. And then what's the outer concept there? It's the sciences, as in the Baconian sense, as power over the environment. For us, we usually notice sort of science as power over economics and the ability to monetize everything. But the older concept is power over the environment. But when the power over the environment begins to encroach the inside of the human being, when there's no longer an idea of the inside and outside because everything's one stuff, as in Daniel Dennett's term, and the transhumanism begins to come in, then the great confusion comes in, and where's the place of this man's aloneness anymore? Where's the place of the problems in Jung of the human being, which have been so untouched, the phylogenetic unconscious and the rest of it? We have here then on this score a music that was in the service of the higher project. We have this again in Wagner. This is in the current usage when we speak of the Gesamtkunstwerk, this is always brought in through, there's some architectural concept where they modified Wagner's concept, but if you look at what Wagner and Nietzsche were originally speaking about, is really a replacement. It doesn't mean the total work of art, it means the communal work of art. So it's a replacement idea of the replacement for the Catholic totality of view. This is what the music was meant to be, and you can see this in the even in the Dritte Reich, in the sense of how Wagner goes with the rise and fall of the people. And you can say what you want about Hitler, but that his philosophy wasn't too well put together. But he genuinely loved Nietzsche, and you can't genuinely love Nietzsche without some kind of intellectual nature, which I would say in contradistinction to somebody like Trump, who's just pure egotist. So there's ideas that work in the German sphere that aren't at work in the other sphere. And one thing I want to bring out is that in the Nazi sphere, we have more of an inwardness going. If you think of the Cossacks, if you think of what Dugin talks about, the Kurgan hypothesis and Gimbutas and all this, if you think of Paranjanov, the great Armenian Soviet director, and this sort of unconstrained forces coming out of the civilian nature of the Narod and so on, and this is one scholar put it this way: the pogroms in 1918 or so. General Denikin said, "What's an American asked him, why don't you stop these pogroms?" And he said, "Well, the Russians are bad. The Russians are bad." So you see this Rausch, this Nietzschean Rausch, these evil. The identity of vigor and evil, and the Cossacks simply were having a good time, as it were. One scholar put it, laughter, wine, and rape. So it wasn't that they had a high idea. It wasn't that they were had high plans like all the principles of Carl Schmitt and so on, but no, it was the forgetfulness. It was the lowest level of the civilian logos. But let's go. I'm not trying to denounce this, but I want to bring this into contrapuntal connection. So there's two or more things going on at once, but they're unified in a way. Let's go on with that on the next thing.